Welcome to Releasing Trauma, a Survivor's Podcast. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. I am a survivor of emotional bullying, rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, and grief. After losing my husband in 2019, I set off on a new adventure to help other women release their trauma and create a life they can cherish. Each week, I will feature a guest expert or survivor to share their stories, tips, wisdom, and more. The goal is so that you can take away even just the smallest nugget of information you can use in your life right now to make a change, and to remind you that you're not alone. There is life after trauma, and you can move from victim to thriver and create a life you can cherish. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Releasing Trauma. I am your host, Tracy Osborne. With me today is Laura Khoudari, and we are going to talk about how lifting heavy things, aka weights, can actually help to heal your trauma. So, Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on, Tracy.
Well, I just finished reading your book, Lifting Heavy Things, which is just out. And if you're listening, I highly recommend you go get a copy. It will be down in the show notes. It was a fantastic book, easy read, and I learned a lot, even though I'm a weightlifter myself. There were still some things in there that I was able to learn, so that was fantastic. Before we dive into our conversation, though, why don't you share a little bit about your backstory and how you came to be a weightlifter and lifting, or a power lifter, aren't you? And lifting the heavy things.
Yeah, sure. It's a funny journey. Because I am I am a certified personal trainer and corrective exercise specialist. And I actually very specifically do trauma-informed personal training and strength training, using the gym as a place to process your trauma. And my journey is unconventional in that I was the kind of person who cut gym class. I resented my college for having a PE requirement. I had sustained a back injury at 20, and the doctor suggested I strength train for it following PT, and I did the PT and then did not strength train. Finally, at 27 years old, I showed up to the gym with my mother's insistent encouragement. And I started strength training with a personal trainer who I really connected with. And I didn't like the gym, but I liked how I was feeling. I liked that after 7 years of being kind of walking around really gingerly, and also that's pretty young to be walking around like that, I could walk around without pain. So that began my relationship with the gym. And about 8 years into strength training, by then I liked it. I liked how good it felt. I enjoyed going to the gym. It felt very empowering. And I fell in love. I said I wanted to try barbell sports, specifically Olympic weightlifting. And I really fell in love with it. And I later did take up powerlifting as well. And somewhere in all of that, outside of the gym, I experienced an acute trauma, and in the aftermath developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And one of my coping mechanisms was to continue going to the gym and to strength train, because it's where I stepped into my power in the first place. So it was where I felt strong. But the problem was it was a maladaptive coping skill. So I wasn't using it in a thoughtful way. I was using it as a way to over and over and over again fight. And I was overtraining. So I was doing Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, and karate. And I was training about 10 times a week. And if you will recall, I started strength training because of a back problem. So It wasn't a huge surprise when my back went out again, and this time much more severely than when I was 20. And it left me in a position where I couldn't train. I couldn't really walk very well. And it was a very long journey to get back into the gym. I tried now as somebody who became someone who loved using movement to take care of themselves, I tried trauma-informed yoga, and that was not, it didn't work for me. I found it incredibly triggering. So I realized that I needed to figure out a way to get back to the gym, which was a place that I felt safe and empowered in. And although I did have trauma symptoms in the gym, I found I could recover more easily from them than in other places. But also a way that took care of my back, that took care of my nervous system, that addressed these, made space for me to not push so hard so that I could go into the gym and I could train without maybe triggering flashbacks. And so it was a lot of education, both formal and also just, self-directed through books. And I figured out a way to get back into the gym and train again. And I eventually wanted to share this with other people, because what I was realizing was that not only was I back in the gym, and recovering physically, I was cultivating skills that I was bringing into my therapist's office when I was processing my trauma, and bringing in skills that I was using as part of my recovery. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful, and I want to be able to share this with other people.
And so that's what you do now.
And that's what I do now.
Yeah. Wow. When I first read your book and you were talking about exercise, weightlifting, yoga, and all of that being triggering, I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought that exercise, would trigger flashbacks or, the PTSD symptoms. So that was really, really interesting to me, especially when you're talking about the breath work and breathing.
Right. Trauma is something we store in our bodies.
Right.
And it's also something that impacts our nervous system. So when we're either going really hard, possibly pushing ourselves out of what, Dan Siegel refers to as our window of tolerance, that is one way it can be triggering. If we don't make space to calm down, we just kind of overwhelm our systems. Or also just certain movements, a lot of the time with my clients, they will have a particular part of their body that they're guarding. And when we go to do a certain movement, they don't want to. And there is sometimes a story without words, or sometimes a story with words there. And it's about slowly undoing any sort of patterns and holding without overwhelming the system while we're there. And so sometimes, if you're seeking the perfect execution on a certain exercise, but you're storing a lot in your hips and you go to get that nice full hip extension, it can be an overwhelming experience for some folks. And also movements, it's not always movement. It can also be, people think of yoga. Yoga has so many different forms. There's often a stillness to yoga that can be very triggering. And that was actually one of the issues for me, was the stillness.
Okay, that makes sense. I could see that. Now, how do we go about, lifting weights to release that trauma? How does that work?
Sure. So, I talk very specifically, by the way, and we're going to speak right now about lifting weights, but I do think that you can bring this approach to any exercise practice. And that is something that I do talk about in the book. And I get into this approach much more in the book than we could here. But really there's a couple of different things we bring, which is like really putting the conditions in place to feel safe in your practice. So whether you're in the gym or you're in your home, I walk people through figuring out what's going to be the best environment for them, and also acknowledging that changes, right? Sometimes that changes because of things like a pandemic, or sometimes it changes because of where you're at, where your practical things like your schedule, your budget, or all of a sudden, like the vibe at a place is not the vibe you want anymore. So we talk about all that. And then the actual practice itself, you really want to turn it into more like what we think of when we think about certain yoga practices, or qigong or tai chi, even, where you're moving really mindfully. Now, depending on what your experience is with lifting weights, if you've had a coach or a personal trainer, they may have cued you to do a movement where you're really paying attention to how the movement feels as opposed to what the movement looks like. And that is a big part of this sort of work, which is experiencing your body, tuning into your body and noticing how movement feels and staying with that. And what you're doing is you are developing interoception, which is the sense of what's going on inside your body. And that interoception is a really useful tool when you're also processing your trauma in therapy, because it's how you know how you feel, right? It's your feelings are in your body. Your feelings are not the thoughts in your head. So being able to stay with your body. And then what we're doing when we're doing it with weight training or any sort of exercise, you're under stress. Exercise is a stress. Like when you talk with a fitness professional, they use words that can sound a little bit scary if you don't get the context, like progressive overload. But what these things are doing is talking about using stress, and we could call it good stress if you're not comfortable with the idea of stress, to make changes that you're seeking, right? Like to make stronger muscles, so we're using stress and we're staying with our body under stress. It's a really good skill to practice so that when you're out in the world, whether you're struggling to feel safe in the world in general, or if you are having difficult conversations, you are more able to stay present and stay with those feelings in your body because you've been practicing doing that in a safer environment like the gym.
Okay. And, I like that you're focusing on the body because so much trauma work is focused on the mind. Mm-hmm. And we forget our bodies. And our bodies, like you said before, store that trauma inside. And it can cause all kinds of chaos and ailments and what have you. So being able to move your body like that helps to release that trauma that's stored inside.
Right. You have to really be with the experience, and I think that's the big thing. That's the difference between, I was talking about this recently. Let's say I'll talk about myself. Say I'm like, I want to flip some tires. And I don't know why I keep going to this example because I've never flipped tires, but I clearly
it's so much fun.
I clearly have to try this because I keep talking about it. It is
so much fun.
So like, I'm going to go flip some tires. Now, like if I just go flip some tires, but I don't really pay attention to the experience, we have a couple things going on. One, I am at higher risk for injury. So that's just the straight up like good coaching stuff. But the other thing is I'm at a very high risk of just pushing myself, not just into an aroused state, which is okay, right? That's actually what we're chasing in that moment, but too much in an aroused state. So I'm overwhelming my body and then I'm just like exhausted afterwards. And I'm not actually processing anything. I'm just sort of trying to get rid of stuff for the time being. And that's okay sometimes, but it's not going to get you anywhere. It's not really going to make progress. So like, that's a great way to deal with like the excessive stress of a bad day. But if you're really looking to get into more processing those feelings and moving through them and having them leave your system, you really need to stay with it and be with the experience. So go and flip those tires and be aggressive, but really pay attention to what it feels like to flip those tires. And not so much the idea of doing it and then just going without paying attention to what's happening inside as you do it.
Right. So it's keeping us grounded and keeping us present in the now, as opposed to just doing things mindlessly and haphazardly.
Right. And, suppose you start to flip your tires. This is just like occurring to me. You're going and you start and you realize like you went in there thinking like, you're just so angry. I'm so angry. And maybe you don't even know why, but that's what you're sort of thinking in your head, but you start to flip it and you're with it. And all of a sudden you realize, oh gosh, I am so sad, right? You will notice that. You might notice a shift.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something under that. And, that's worth exploring. And like I said, it doesn't have to be with every workout, but I do think it is a useful tool to have.
Oh, absolutely. And I love that your coaching style, you don't push your clients.
Mm-mm.
Like, I've trained with with personal trainers, and I don't walk for 3 days afterwards on leg day. I cuss them out every time I have to go to the bathroom. But I love that you're gentler with your clients.
Yes. I mean, a big part of trauma recovery, right? So when you work with athletes who are training for performance, that's going to be a different style training. And I have definitely had many of those days, Tracy, where you would like fall onto the toilet because you can't sit.
And getting up is non-existent.
That's a whole separate conversation about whether or not that's good training. I've actually come around to a position where I don't necessarily agree with that. Right. But when you're training for, general quality of life, you do want to work hard, but you don't want to work so hard that, again, like it overwhelms you, it exhausts you, it makes you feel like you can't get up later. Because one of the big things we're doing, especially with trauma recovery, is we're helping people feel safe in their bodies. So pay attention in what feels good and safe and okay to me, practicing that. And then the idea is so that if you feel good and safe and in control of your body, maybe you're getting better sleep now, maybe you're managing some chronic pain that you've been struggling with, you can start to, again, feel safer having your feelings and feel safer in your environment. But it all has to start by feeling safe in your body, right? I mean, that when you are living with trauma, you don't feel safe in your body. You don't feel safe in your feelings. And that's the first thing you have to restore in order to get any healing work done. So a big part of my work is reminding folks that they are in charge of their bodies. They are the agents. They are choosing to show up. And they can choose to leave, and they can choose to discuss things with me or not. It's always, always, always a choice. I mentioned in the book, even like, you even have a choice in reading my book. And I'm always really honored that, somebody is reading my book or choosing to work with me or listening to me speak to you on this podcast, because I really do believe it's always a choice.
Absolutely. And with that choice also comes creating our boundaries. So we can have our boundaries in life. We have our boundaries in the gym, what's comfortable for us, how far do we want to go, and whatnot. But those boundaries are something, that we need to make almost concrete.
Yes. And the gym is another place, and that checking in that we were talking about is another way. You can bring practicing your boundaries into the workout. So if I invite my client, I don't say like, now it's time to squat. I ask, I say, the plan is to squat today. How do you feel about that? Right? That invites them to actually stop and see how they feel about that and explore if that's something they want to do. Because maybe they usually love squats, but today it's not the day. They don't want to do it. I want them to practice with me, checking in and realizing they don't want to, and saying, no, I don't want to do that. See what that experience is like.
That's awesome. It's just such a safe space for them to practice so many different things, not just exercising.
Right. And the thing is with that is like, my goal is to make clients really feel like safe and agents, and I can strive to do that, to the best of my ability. And sometimes I make mistakes, or sometimes that can't be achieved for whatever reason, but that's what we're always working for. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Laura, how can we find you online?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my website is laurakhoudari.com. And so that's a great way to find me. And if you sign up for my newsletter, right now it's been a little busier because of the book, but usually about once or twice a month, I send out any sort of resources I've found and any updates on my services or appearances or workshops I might be doing. And you can find me on Instagram and on Twitter, both at Laura Khoudari. And my book can be purchased wherever you like to order your books from.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And listeners, the drill. Everything will be on the show notes. Head over to releasingtraumapodcast.com if you're listening on one of our partner stations, and pull up Laura's show. All her contact information, as well as the link to get her book over on Amazon, will be down there for you. So thank you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us a little bit about, this is a great new, well, it's probably not new, but, a shifted way of thinking of exercising as far as using it to heal from trauma rather than just get your body healthy.
It actually is pretty new. So
is it?
Yes.
Well, I'm thinking exercise isn't new. That's
exercise is not
exercise
new.
Isn't new, but using it to heal from trauma, yeah, I could see where that would be new. Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you so much for meeting with me and chatting with me.
Thank you. And listeners, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk to you in the next show.